All right, everybody. I'm excited for today's interview at Como Design Studio. We have with us a former professor of mine from USC. His name is Jonathan Taplin, and he's had a career that has spanned across the intersections of the Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, creativity and business. He was a tour manager for Bob Dylan. He worked with Janis Joplin. He was a film producer. I remember he worked in finance, from what I recall, as well. He had a one of the first VOD businesses. He worked for Disney. Now he's an educator and an author. And I remember back in 2011, at least for me, and the reason that I wanted to interview him is that he was one of the few models for the kind of life that I wanted to pursue. Like I knew that I was always creative, but I didn't know how to apply my creativity to business and what that path would lead to, right? And now I'm a designer and I've done all these different things that I was passionate about. But I always thought it was interesting that at every stage of his life, at least from what I gained in the class that I took with him, he was a part of some kind of boom period that was happening within the cultural context of what he was living through. And I think with AI blowing up now and these new technologies that are coming up, it would be very helpful for people just to understand where the opportunities lie. And, this new forefront and this new frontier that we're all going towards, I think that it's much harder to understand as a young person, how do I fit into this ecosystem? Right. So over the past few years, Professor Taplin, I've been mentoring a lot of students, and I feel like our conversations, at least for this year, have changed. It's very different. So before, people were more focused on how do I get ahead? Like, how do I succeed if I want to be a designer, if I want to work in technology? But now I feel like the conversation has changed to how do I become more intentional about the path that I want to take, right? Like, yes, I want to work in tech. Yes, I want to do all these amazing things, but I want to stay true to who I am and my values, right? And I think that that's something that I would love to learn from you in this conversation, like, because you've done a lot of different things. Um, but I think from somebody like yourself, like I want to understand how you approach life and business, right? So can you give us just a high level introduction into who you are and some of your proudest work before we dig into the other stuff?
And Jeremy, I feel the same thing, change,
Mm,
that there's a turning going on.
mm, mm,
I think it's really important. Uh,
mm-hmm.
I wrote a book 5 years ago, 6 years ago, long before the tech clash,
Yeah, yeah.
called "Move Fast and Break Things," and I don't think that's the right attitude right now. That's not the attitude that we need now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, look, my history is long, but I'm 76. So, but I started out the year before, in the summer before I went to Princeton in 1965. I went to the Newport Folk Festival, and that was the year that Bob Dylan decided to go electric on stage. And I was lucky enough to have some friends who introduced me to his manager and then to other bands that Albert Grossman, who was the manager, was working with, including the Question Jug Band and the Paul Butterfield Blues Band and Janis Joplin and Peter Paul and Mary, and you know, and eventually I ended up working for Bob and the band, and when I graduated from Princeton in 1969, and spent 3 years on the road. I was asked in 1973 to produce the concert for Bangladesh by George Harrison. And I did that. And when that was finished, I realized that most of the people that I really wanted to work for in music didn't want to go on the road anymore. The Beatles were too popular. They couldn't tour. George Harrison didn't want to tour. Eric Clapton had drug problems. Van Morrison had alcohol problems, and the band was having its own problems. And so I went out to California and was introduced to a young film editor named Marty Scorsese. And I was just so naive that I didn't realize you weren't supposed to spend your own money making movies. And he had a script he wanted to make that he'd been wanting to make for 5 years. And it eventually became a movie called Mean Streets with Bob De Niro and Harvey Keitel. And I produced that. I funded it with a friend and produced it, and then eventually sold it to Warner Brothers. I continued to make movies for the next 10 years. And then I made The Last Waltz with Marty. I made Under Fire, a bunch of movies, and end up at Walt Disney as a producer, and a corporate raid started and by a guy named Saul Steinberg. And I got some friends in Texas, the Bass Brothers, to kind of rescue Walt Disney. And they paid me as their investment advisor. And that was like a shock, because I made more money in like 4 weeks than I'd made in 5 years. And then they asked me to go to work for their real investment advisor, which was Merrill Lynch Mergers and Acquisition Group. And I did that for 4 years. At the end of the day, I didn't really like it as much as I liked doing creative stuff. And so I went back to making movies with a German director named Wim Wenders, made a bunch of documentaries in the 90s with PBS, and then founded, as you noted, Entertainer, which was the first streaming video on demand company. Ran that for 6 years. At the end of the day, the major studios that were both our financiers and our providers of content decided they wanted to do it themselves. They didn't want an interloper. And so they stopped giving us movies, and we shut it down. I sued them all in antitrust court. And then because I was suing all the major studios, I couldn't go back to being a movie producer. So I was invited by the dean of the Annenberg School to come and teach. And so I started teaching. And then in 2008, started the Annenberg Innovation Lab. And by that time, I'd won the antitrust suit, so I could afford to teach and continued to do that. And then in 2015, I started writing books about big tech. And I've got a new one just about to come out in September called The End of Reality. It's about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and Mark Andreessen. And so that's the short story. And, in terms of what you're saying, I think I've used the term techno-determinism. And I think one of the things your generation has to be careful of is the belief that people like Elon Musk have your best interests at heart. And that the world they see, whether that means spending $10 trillion going to Mars, and those aren't going to be Elon Musk's $10 trillion. They're going to be your $10 trillion, the taxpayers. And we're going to funnel it to him through NASA. And it's a big boondoggle. There's nothing there. There's a bunch of dirt and no oxygen. Whether it's Mark Zuckerberg's $5 billion plan to have you wear a virtual reality helmet for 8 hours a day. Again, total escape. Has nothing to do with your life, and you should resist it completely. Whether it's Mark Andreessen's belief that cryptocurrency will replace the dollar and and that you should invest in NFTs, buy those Bored Apes for $50,000, which you can't give away today. It's a scam. And your generation is the one that's been played as the sucker. If you look at who buys crypto, who buys NFTs, it's not my generation. It's your generation. Mm-hmm. And that's why, they got Steph Curry and Brady and, LeBron and whatever, Kim Kardashian, shilling for crypto. Matt Damon, because you're impressionable. And you think, well, if Matt Damon says only the bold will survive, then I should be bold and buy crypto. And we all know where that ended. So I'm of the opinion that we need a different kind of culture, a culture that isn't so move fast and break things, a culture that slows down a little bit and kind of thinks about where the humanity is, because AI presents a real challenge, and that is, do you really believe that machines should control the world? Because that's what Elon and Zuck and those guys want. They want their AI machines to run everything. And at the end of the day, that will put a huge number of people out of work. It's already beginning to happen. And, then they figure that they can con the government into giving you universal basic income to sit at home and play in the metaverse all day. And I think that's not a life.
So if you were a young Jonathan Taplin and you want to become a part of this, if you wanted to be at the forefront of a new revolution, what would that look like, and what would you be doing?
Well, I'd be trying to construct a community of people that want to make real things, not fantasy things, but make real things, whether that means make real music on real instruments, whether it's like Chris Nolan wants to make movies still on film. Whether it's Marty Scorsese who wants to make, now I'm citing old guys, but there are young guys who want to do that too, who really don't just want to make fantasy movies about superheroes that can throw 10-ton trucks down the street and, make things that actually have to do with people's lives. And it's not only just in media. It could be that you want to make a farm-to-table restaurant, or maybe it means that you want to think about how you and your family don't necessarily have to be in the city, that you could live in the country, that you could grow your own food, that you could be more self-sufficient. And my feeling is that these things happen all over the place. I'm involved with a bunch of musicians. I'm the chairman of something called the Americana Music Foundation, and a bunch of musicians like Rhiannon Giddens and Brandy Carlisle and T-Bone Burnett and, Molly Tuttle, who are trying to pull up the roots music that was the critical music of earlier generations. In other words, I'm afraid that a lot of students today don't have much musical knowledge before Kanye. They don't understand that there were guys like Marvin Gaye or Clyde McPhatter or Muddy Waters or Robert Johnson going way back, making extraordinary music. And they should be aware of that. And they should realize, quite honestly, Jay-Z knows who Muddy Waters is, and he knows that I'm a Man was the first rap song, and that was 1942, So, but I don't think many young people have any sense of history. So, one last thing. Your generation has been told that the key to your future will be to learn how to code.
Right.
That's why, even schools like USC have put so much money into the engineering school, into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and so little money into the humanities, the Annenberg School, into the Dornsife School, and that's the belief that if you know how to code, you'll be set for life. But if you really look at what AI is doing, it's doing a lot of the coding. And it could be that someone who's a coder, unless he's some exceptional wizard, could be like someone who's a radiologist. In other words, there's not going to be a job that pays $200,000 to a person who calls themselves a radiologist in 5 years. The AI will do it all, and it'll do it better than the humans. And so the radiologist will be a guy who carries the output from the AI and explains it to the patient. That's not a $200,000 job. So I think, we have to think about what the future looks like and who are the people that will help us out of this situation. And I promise you, it's not Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. They have no interest in it. They're off in fantasy land. And their only interest is preserving their wealth. And that means they want political gridlock. Why do you think Musk is so happy to be supporting right-wing trolls? Because he doesn't want anything to change politically, because then maybe he'd have to pay more taxes. Why did he leave California? So he wouldn't have to pay so much taxes. It's just selfish.
So I think from what I'm hearing, you feel like people need to go back to kind of like the roots of humanity, more community, more reliance on each other. But then again, I think, living in a capitalist society, like how do we take care of each other?
Right.
Right. So that's what I wanted to understand from you. Like, what opportunities do you see? Because to me, you've always been this person that has foresight. Right. And I just wanted to learn from you, like, what do you see? Like, if that's the thing and that's a part of the resistance.
Well, just take your work. Right. So you're a designer.
Right.
Probably have some people who work with you. Your own little cooperative, in a way. You've formed a community, and you rely on each other.
Right.
And you help each other, and you're rooting for each other. You're not trying to screw your friends, So that's the beginning. It's almost like a spiritual quest in a way to find what it is that means important. And you said at the very beginning, I think kids are less interested in just, I got to make so much money. Yeah. And how can I have a life that feels meaningful? I wrote a book called The Magic Years, which is a memoir about the rock and roll and film days. And in it, I talk about a Greek philosopher called Epicurus, who had this vision of what made a good life. And he said there was only 3 things. If you had the 3 things, you had a good life. So one is the company of good friends. So you've got that, right? You got your little group, your Karass, a group of people that doing stuff together. The second thing was the ability to do meaningful work that lets you feel autonomous. In other words, you don't feel like you're being a slave, right? That you have some freedom in your work, but it's meaningful for you. And the third is some kind of core philosophy about some higher purpose that you have in life. In other words, Musk and Zuckerberg and Thiel have all been pushing this libertarian notion that individual freedom is the only thing that matters. And it all goes back, as I used to teach you guys, to Ayn Rand and those ridiculous books like The Fountainhead and stuff like that every techie has read. And her thought was, if you don't just look out for yourself, you're going to get screwed in life. You should never. Altruism, she said, is the stupidest thing that anyone ever thought of. And so I believe that period is over. And I think what we need now is begin to think about how we build communities, small communities that can support each other and don't need to necessarily have to be mass media. You don't have to produce the next Avengers. That doesn't need to be what you do. So that's where I'm coming from.
Man, I agree with you on so many levels, Professor Taplin. Because out here, I don't know if you live in Los Angeles, but out here in Compton, I think Compton is really well known for the gang violence and things of that nature. But from what I see, there, Compton used to be a farming community, and that's kind of coming back. There's people who are teaching farming and sustainability and like how to grow your own food, right? And so I think like when you look at Compton, those are the kind of communities that can be a part of this revolution that you're kind of talking about, right?
That's so important. And if you think about what was the greatest tragedy of the last 200 years in America, it was that at the end of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had this idea of 40 acres and a mule. Spike Lee took it as the name of his company. But the idea was that we would give every slave family 40 acres of land and a mule. And they could start their life farming, working the land, having property, owning something, right? And it got killed. I mean, Lincoln got killed, and then Andrew Johnson, his vice president, was a racist creep, and he killed it, and it never happened. That, to me, was the greatest tragedy that ever happened, because what's missing in the Black community is property wealth, right?
You're right.
But you can start that again. You can have that working that little patch of land in Compton where there used to be houses and now they're gone and stuff like that. Community gardens, learn how to be self-sufficient, learn a self-sustaining life, learn how to eat better and not just go to McDonald's and, all of that. And that extends to many, many things. You learn how to make music, just don't spend your time on Spotify. Learn how to make art, learn how to do stuff. Don't just be a consumer. And because what capitalism has done is turn everybody into a passive consumer. And basically universities and everybody else, it's destroyed your ability to know how to do anything. and that's not healthy. I
But
mean,
from what you've seen in your life, how do those sorts of movements scale? You know,
they don't
how
scale. That's the trick.
hmm,
They can be small. In other words, when I was in 1969, I moved to a town called Woodstock, New York. This was before the Woodstock Festival, and the Woodstock Festival wasn't even in Woodstock, New York, but it was a small artist community, right? And there was a bunch of musicians, maybe 30, 40 good world-class musicians lived in the town. There was a bunch of artists, maybe 20 or 30 world-class artists lived in the town. And it was self-supporting. There was enough money that the musicians made on the road and from their records, and the artists made from selling their work, to support a tax base for the town. And we didn't need anybody else.
hmm,
We had good grocery stores. We had, our whatever was needed was there. A decent restaurant, a coffee bar. It was okay. So the idea that everything has to scale up, like Elon Musk wants X to be everything in your life and you only use one applicant, is nonsense. You don't have to do that. You just need your own small community that works for you and allows you to make a decent living.
hmm. In your life, what do you feel like has been the common thread amongst all these different things that you've done?
Well, honestly, some of it's been being open to chance. I mean, as I think I've told you when you were my student, you gotta just be not fixated on that there's only one thing you can do.
Hmm.
Like I mean, I've had 5 different careers, right?
Right, right. Yeah.
And if an opportunity presents itself and it seems interesting, you should maybe grab it. And you should be open enough to think that you could totally, in the tech world, they call it a pivot. You
Hmm.
could pivot. And even if you have a company and it's doing one thing and you think that's what we do, but maybe you have skills that could do something else. And you have to be open to that, where it goes. I mean, look, we're all going to be tested in the next 5 years by
Exactly. Yeah.
AI revolution. I don't have any doubt that it's going to change things. The main thing, though, is what it won't do is make original art. It won't make original music or original novels. It can make copies of stuff really good. So if you just assume it's good enough, AI can do that, right? In other words, Marvel could put every screenplay they ever wrote into the AI and say, make me a new Marvel screenplay starring Tony Stark with the Hulk. And it has to have a happy ending. And it could probably, in half a day, turn out a screenplay,
Hmm.
right? It
Hmm.
wouldn't be anything new, right? Because all AI does is take everything that was in the internet before and recombines it into clever ways of putting one word in front of another one. There's some research that says that AI is actually getting stupider. The more time and more stuff it gets off the internet, the less accurate it's getting. Well, that would be natural. You know that the more time you spend on the internet, the less you know, right?
Hmm.
You get so much
True.
nonsense. You get so much disinformation. Now you're smart enough to filter it out and say, well, that's nonsense. But AI isn't.
Hmm.
It's taking everything that it reads and assumes it has some validity. So, I'm an AI skeptic, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's going to change a lot of things. I told you about the radiologist. I could tell you about lawyers. It used to be fresh out of law school kids were put in a law library to research a case. And they put 4 or 5 kids in that law library and said, research everything there is. And there would be all these books they pull out of the thing and try and find the president. Now they turn the AI on that, and it does it in like 3/4 of an hour. It doesn't require anybody. So, that's going to have a big effect on the legal profession. So, I realize there's going to be a lot of changes, but not all of them are going to be good. And we've got to be skeptical. And you used a word that I use quite often, which is resistance. If the goal of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk is to have machines rule over nature, which it is, then we should resist that.
Okay. And if that's the case, I think what comes with resistance is a lot of discomfort, right? Like people questioning, should I move forward with it? What are the implications of me doing that on an individual level? How does that affect my family? How does that affect my community? Right. I guess with what you've seen in your life, when you've made your own transitions at each stage, how did you fight that internal discomfort?
Well, you have to just have a kind of moral compass that says, this is not feeling right. This is not good. In other words, as I told you earlier, I made a detour into the investment banking world in 1984.
Right.
And by 1986 or 1987, I began to encounter people like Ivan Boesky and Mike Milken and people who ended up in jail, right? They were inside traders, right? They were crooks, but they were very rich crooks. They were living in private jets and doing that. But they eventually, and you would just be in meetings with these people. This is before they got busted. But the point is, I began to feel then like this doesn't feel right. These people are not playing straight, and I don't have anything to do with that. And so I got out of it. And you'll all have, your generation will all have those kind of moments in the next few years. Okay, do I let the AI write this thing I'm supposed to develop for a company and just take the lazy way out and let it do it? Because it saves me a bunch of hassle and everything, and maybe it'll be good enough. Maybe not. How does that develop your own capabilities of writing or your own capabilities of drawing or anything else? Do I use Stable Diffusion when I know that they ripped off the complete Getty corpus of copyrighted pictures to make their generative AI system? Well, that seems like not fair to all those photographers that put their work with Getty, and now it's being knocked off. It's close enough. It's, the Stable Diffusion can make a picture that's not copyright, but it's close enough to do that. So just one last example. one of the problems in this actors strike that's going on right now is that the studios suggested that they would like the ability to take a background actor, what we used to call extras, right, and scan their complete body and put it into a virtual engine, which then, and pay one time $700 to do that, and never have to pay anything more. And then they can use that person, put them in different clothes, put a different hat on them, put a different expression on their face, and put them in the background of any movie they want for the rest of history without having to pay another cent. That's not ethical to me. And that's partially why the actors are resistant. So, I mean, there'll be lots of issues like that to come up.
But also more opportunities for people to make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got you. I know we're almost at time here, but I remember, we wanted also to touch on the end of reality. So I wanted to understand what inspired that.
Well,
because it's like, is it a coincidence that it's coming at this time, or are you?
I mean, it's not a coincidence at all. I just looked around the world and I said, okay, here we're living in a world where, for instance, 40% of the American people believe that Donald Trump won the election. Okay, so they're living in total fantasy land. Okay, how did that happen? Well, it's because a bunch of people, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, built these social media engines that allow people to put out the most ridiculous nonsense without any fear that they would get, libel suits. In other words, Rupert Murdoch just had to pay $750 million to this company, Smartmatic, the voting machine company, right? Because he defamed them. He said all sorts of nonsense on TV. But social media has this safe harbor protection that you can't sue them because they're not responsible for anything that's on their service. So Elon Musk is not responsible for any lie that goes on his service. So you can't sue Twitter or X. You can't sue Facebook. So the reason all this nonsense is out there is because we have these characters, the richest men in the world, who just have no care for the truth. They don't. It's not something that comes into their brain, and so beyond that, we have lots of problems which technology can actually help solve. Right? Solar power and wind power could help really make us transition to a better, cleaner energy system. I've seen 3D printed houses that could be done for like $60,000 a house, where it costs LA $700,000 to make a house for poor people. It's ridiculous. We have all these things that technology could do, and the most important technologists in the world are saying, let's go to Mars, let's spend our time in the universe, let's create a phony currency, let's live to 200. That's what Peter Thiel wants. He wants to be able to live to 200 years old. Now that's going to cost him millions and millions of dollars, and that technology won't be available to you or me, but maybe he will live to 200. Man. So that's the thesis of the end of reality. And I mean, it's sad to me that the richest people in the country are just taking us off on this complete fantasy plan for the future.
Well, I hope whoever watches this video, Professor Taplin, they just start to be like, okay, now I know what to do. Let's do it, right? Let's go start the communities in Compton. Let's go,
Yeah,
start the new revolution.
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I,
man.
I'm
It's
gonna
been
have to
great
check out the
talking.
book. Yeah, same here, same here. Thank you so much for making time.
My
But
pleasure.
where can people find you on social media or online?
I just johntaplin.com is my website. And I have a Facebook page and a Twitter page, but I don't spend much time on them. Okay,
All right. Well,
good.
I hope everybody enjoyed it and got some wisdom
Hey, and pre-order my book. It comes out September 5th. So
and the reality.
okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Peace.